Thank you all for coming out this evening. I think we're going to have some very exciting news to share with you. But before we get started, this is kind of a good news, bad news meeting for the Board of Directors. This will be the last time that we will have David Marek serving in the capacity as our treasurer. He and Donna leave on Friday for their new home down in Florida. So we will have both the incoming and the outgoing treasurer. If I could have the Board of Directors join me up front here and ask David and Bob to come out. David has been the treasurer of the Master Board since April of 2014, so 2.5 years. Now the great news is that prior to David taking that position, our treasurer was Bob Hochschlag, we're down at the end of the row here. And so Bob was our treasurer in 2013 and 14. We had the transition in that year of going from one of the board members, a non-financial type, if you will, serving in that capacity. And the financial complexity that you're going to see this evening of this association said we needed more firepower in this position. So Dave has been serving in that capacity for the last 2.5 years, and Bob the year prior to that, which helped us make that transition from generalist, if you will, to specialist. Both David and Bob are CPAs, and both have served in financial executive positions and have served us very well. But I'd like to take just a minute to thank this guy right here. A lot of what you're going to see this evening is a result of his financial management over the last 12 months and before. And he is going to leave a big hole on this board, not just from the numbers, but he has an uncanny ability to look outside the box and to come up with different approaches to solving a common problem. And then being able to communicate them to people such as me, and perhaps some of you, in understandable terms that make sense and allow us to make good, sound decisions. And so not only are we losing our treasurer, but we are losing a big advisor and guidance for this Board of Directors. So I'll give a chance to anybody else from the board before we give him his memento plaque. Anybody like to say anything to David?
Yeah, I'd like to say thank you to David because I don't think this community will ever understand what he's really done for us. Along with, it started with the guy down that's going to take his place, but David came in at a tough time, has helped us immensely, and all I can say is thank you very much.
Bob is going to be our next treasurer, but we can always take a vote and keep David here. How many would like him to stay here? Raise your hand. There you go, okay. And Bob is fantastic too, so I don't want to take anything away from Bob. We're very sorry to see David go, but when you have somebody knock on your door and say, I want to buy your house, it's really hard to turn down. So thank you, David, for all you've done for us.
What?
I have the plaque.
What's it say?
I'd like to thank the board for giving me something else to pack. And trust me, after 2 days of Packers in my house, if I didn't move quickly enough, I was going to be put in a box and sent to Florida in a truck. So it says, thank you for your years of dedicated service. And it's dedicated because I really enjoyed it. It was fun for all of you, and we've had some turnover on the board, but yet I think it's continuing to go in a very positive approach. And I think the more we see the committee structures built, where there's bench strength that guarantees that new people will be coming onto the board that understand the approach that we're going to take. And as I get into the presentation, I'll cover some material that it reminds you, this is a $6.5 million operation. This is not a PTA meeting bake sale. This is not something that you just say, well, I did this once. No, this is a business. This is a big business. And the more you understand that, the more you'll understand how good it is to have a management company like OB Sports that knows how to run a business like this, and an accommodating board that lets them run the board, for the board, and do what they're expected to do. So again, this has been a fun time for me. I've met a lot of interesting people along the way. I've enjoyed getting to know the staff of OB Sports better. And I think that I can honestly say that the financial condition of Heritage Eagle Bend Golf Club has never been better, and that's not a bad way to go out. We talk a lot about budgets, and most people think about the operations here as the only budget that we have. But in your monthly dues that you pay, money comes in and goes into 3 very specific areas. The operations budget covers what you see most of the time when you come up here. The payroll for the staff, the facilities, the golf course, the meeting rooms, the restaurant, the banquets, all of that stuff. The grass cutting, the lawn mowing, everything is operational. And that takes the majority of the money that comes in on a monthly basis. And that's because it covers the day-to-day operations. But there's 2 other components that come out of that monthly dues. And if you think about this from a standpoint of your personal side, if you receive a paycheck and you cover your utility bills and cable and food and beverages and stuff like that, you also want to have a savings component. And the reserve fund is really the savings that we have dedicated quite a bit of money to make sure that a property that is aging, and not just the residents in it, but the facilities are aging, and they have to be renewed and replaced. This is the normal wear and tear. And the reserve fund is where the money goes into for things that are planned and exist today. Now, every few years we have a reserve study, and we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail. We did one back in 2014, and they do an inventory of everything that's here. And they try to guess when it will need to be repaired or replaced, adjust for inflation, try to factor in the cost, and then they come up with you will need this money in these years if everything goes the way we think. Well, that's great, but it doesn't work out that way. But it's just the savings concept that's there, and I think is important for you to understand. That gets quite a bit of your monthly dues also. The capital improvement fund is for things that don't exist, but we realize should exist, and we want to get them to their existence. The pickleball courts last year was an example. We had 4 tennis courts, there was a pickleball interest, we converted 1 tennis court into a pickleball court. The money for that came out of the capital improvement fund. The vestibule expansion, never had an air-conditioned airlock system, that's going to be paid out of the capital improvement fund. The barn that is being built to protect all the equipment that was purchased out of the reserve fund is something we didn't have before. So again, you have to realize that we have our operations, the stuff we have, and the stuff we'd like to have. And the more we get into the capital improvement fund, you'll see that it's the type of thing that has to be coming from some source. Where do we get these ideas of what we want to do? As the development to our south is built, there'll be more demands for, that's a newer place. Not better, just newer. They don't have a golf course, they don't have a huge facility like this to have meetings in. But there will be people saying, well, what about this? They have something there. There's another development going in, eventually down off of E470. They'll have things. So again, you want to have some money to do something in the future that none of you probably would guess tonight what that is. But it's good to know that the money is going to be there because it's part of the funding that we have already. So of the $248 that are paid for the Master Association monthly dues, 168 or $2.9 million a year goes to operations. I said earlier a $6.5 million budget is usually where we end up for operations. So if 2.9 comes from your contributions, the balance has to come from golf course revenue, restaurant revenue, rentals of the facility, ads in the newspaper, or the magazines that go out, banquets, things like that. So it's a balance. We don't try to get the full 6.5 million from you and say, we don't care about the outsiders. We try to balance outside revenue and inside revenue, so you're paying for not quite half of the operations budget through your contributions. Currently, $65 a month goes to the reserve fund. That's $1.12 million a year. The plan, and it's a 20-year plan, I think came out to be $28 million of anticipated expenditures over that 20-year period. And at the pace that we're going with the balances that we have, there's no real scare that, oh my gosh, we're going to have to ask for more money, because we already contribute $65 a month into that fund. Now the $15 is for the capital improvement fund. You might say, well, that's not a whole lot, but yet it is, because it's for stuff we don't even know we want yet. So it's not like we have the $28 million plan from the reserve fund. This is just for things that after evaluation make sense and we want to do, so that's how that's funded. $259,000. Now, it also receives money every time there's a closing. So when a new person moves into the neighborhood, they contribute 3 months of dues, and that goes into the capital improvement fund. And with the turnover that's going on in this neighborhood, there's a lot of new faces and a lot of new, about 5% so far this year of new membership. Last year was about 6%. So you're talking about 11% of the total population is here less than 2 years from when they started. So that's, again, it's a funding source. You may not be aware of it, but it's a good way to fund the capital improvements, because as a new resident, you're hoping that the current conditions you have will be maintained, and you'll also get some new things that you didn't even know you wanted when you moved here.
So David made mention of the fact that in 2014, we did a comprehensive reserve fund study. We contracted with a company called Reserve Advisors out in Milwaukee. They came in and analyzed every single asset that was on the grounds. And from that study, we had this published document that David is exactly right. It turns out that over the next 20 years, they're indicating that we're going to need $28.7 million just to maintain, either replace or repair, the assets that are here. The chairs that you're sitting on, for example, are not long for this world. When we come here for the holiday party this year, we're going to have brand new chairs to sit on. That was one of the items that was identified in the reserve study. It wasn't perfect. We have discovered certain things that they missed, but it was far better than anything that we'd had in times gone before that. We'd done reserve studies prior to that, but not near as comprehensive or as accurate as Reserve Advisors did. So what that indicated to us, coming out of 2014, was that we needed a rate or a dues increase, and we raised them by $8. Our dues in 2014 were $240, and in 2015, they went to $248, which is what we're still paying. Now, in the 2016 budget, I don't know if that's me or Rob's still back there. In the 2016 budget, we needed additional money, but we were able to settle the lawsuit, and we were able to give back, for all of those who had contributed to the lawsuit, we were able to give back the special assessment money, and we had some we had earned net income in the 2015 timeframe that gave us enough funds to transfer $103,000 into the reserve fund, which negated the need for you and I to contribute $6 more, which is what we had been planned to do based upon the study. The 2017 budget, it has the fact that we anticipate additional significant net income. That's all good news for us. That will allow for additional funding of projects. David made mention of the 3 new items, the noise abatement and the Eagle's Nest. the entry vestibule that we all see when we come up to the clubhouse, and the pole barn, or the protective equipment barn, if you will, that's being built over in the maintenance yard. We anticipate that we're going to have money that is going to be able to let us do more things, and particularly in the 2017 reserve budget, we believe that we're going to be able to fund significant improvements that are scheduled for years out in advance, most particularly in the area of road replacement. We're going to talk more about that in just a little while. David?
If you come to the monthly board meetings, I usually talk about how well we've done compared to the budget. And for 2016, until August, I was saying every month we were better than anticipated on the budget versus actual. And the actual, even in slow months, like the first 4 months of the year, you don't expect a whole lot to be happening at a golf course, but through a combination of good weather, some golf revenue, and some excellent revenue in the restaurant, we were able to have 7 months in a row of actuals being better than budget. August was not that case. We actually had to spend more money for water because it didn't fall out of the sky. We had to pay the city of Aurora and also the Metro District for the water that kept the course green and in playable condition, as you've grown accustomed to. But it's still a very positive trend, and I'm a trend person. I try to remind people that one bad day does not ruin a week, and one bad week does not ruin a month. But when you see a trend where every month was better than expected, that was a very positive thing to look at. For the revenues for 16 versus the same period of time in 15, revenues are up 3.8%. Expenses for the same period are down almost 6%. That's the kind of movement you want to see. When your revenues are better than you expect and your expenses are lower than expected, that delta is a significant positive impact that allows us to make decisions with the excess operating funds that wouldn't be there if those two numbers were switched. If our revenue was down compared to where we thought and our expenses were higher, we would be talking a much different story to you in these slide presentations. But the best thing about it is the net income through August of 16 was $239,000. Now for the whole year last year, if you were here last year for the budget, our goal was to have a budget that would come in by the end of December of 16 with $38,000 of net income. So through August, we already have significantly more than we were thinking we would get for the whole year. You should all feel very comfortable that not only are you helping with this, and we're trying to maintain a balance in this whole thing of inside revenue and outside revenue, but with food and beverage, the revenue was over $100,000 higher in 2016 than it was in 2015. That doesn't just happen. There's a lot of things going on. In banquets, we are becoming a place where people like to come for sports banquets, for military events. The wedding business is doing very well. The restaurant is consistent product. There's more people going to it after rounds of golf, on weekends, on evenings. So again, it's a very good trend. The expenses, some of these are controllable and some of these are not. It's very hard to just skip bills. You can't just say, well, I'm not going to pay my utility bill. But there are times where you can say, well, I don't really need to do that right now, and you can save some money. The management decisions that are being made are showing up in the expense reports that I would sign the checks every Thursday, and you can see where things were going. We're getting the discounts. We're not skipping discounts. We're getting our volume discounts. We're getting OB Sports national discounts. That saves us real money, hard dollars. So again, when you have expenditures going down and revenue going up, we are in very good shape through the 8 months of 16. And I didn't want to confuse people and say, well, maybe I could have gotten September's numbers because we're into October. I did that last year. It was a big mistake because people had old reports, new reports, they didn't know what I was talking about. So we're just going to stay with this and say it's a very good trend. For 17, the paper that you have in front of you, the 8.5 by 14 paper, it shows the revenue sources at the top. It's important for you to know where we make money. I've already told you that $2.9 million comes from the operations through your contributions, but we also have to look at Landscaping and snow removal contracts. People contract with HEBGC to have their lawns mowed. When it snows, to have the snow removed. They do other types of arrangements for new owners coming in. They don't know where to get it, so we'll try them out. They did take over another subdivision for their lawn mowing 2 years ago. Again, that's revenue that stays within the development. There is money earned from the newsletter ads, transponders, other things that you might expect to see in a homeowners association. But that's where the operations revenue comes from. By far, the 168 is the most predictable. There's 1,442 homes times 168, so you know you're going to get 2.9 million from that pretty much without fail. On golf operations, this one is a little bit more something you got to think about. We budget for 33,000 rounds of golf over the year. That includes tournaments, that includes play by residents, outside play, discounts, twilight, clubs, you name it. And it's amazing how the detail can be broken down to identify how many people do all of those rounds. But 33,000 rounds is what we budget for. If the weather cooperates, we can get money in the early months of the year. But we don't budget for revenue. If you look at those charts, you'll see no golf revenue in January and February. We don't want to build a budget that's just, wouldn't it be nice if we made money, and then you don't get it. We'd rather be happy that we had golf when we weren't expecting golf revenue to come in. Tournaments, beverage card, driving range fees, that's all part of what goes into the golf revenue generation. Food and beverage operations, that covers the restaurant, covers banquets in here, it covers those parties with Tony David, the Thanksgiving, Christmas, Valentine's Day, everything you can imagine that's food related comes in under the food and beverage operations. Banquets, like I said, have been very successful. Once you get a school to say, you did this right, they tend to come back because it's the planners, not the kids who come to those, that you want to make sure have a good time. But it seems everybody's having a good time because we are getting a lot of follow-up from Cherokee Trail, Grandview, all the high schools around here, because there isn't a facility like this that can handle what they're looking for. Last year, when we talked about payroll and benefits, I told the group that for the first time in ever, people were staying long enough to actually qualify for the benefits that were offered by OB Sports. Now that sounded kind of bizarre, but we had so much turnover that if we budgeted for benefits but nobody lasted long enough to qualify, we had savings. Last year, we budgeted for the benefits and people were taking the benefits. This year, we have the same situation plus one extra thing. The Department of Labor mandated new overtime rules starting December 1st, 2016, which means you can't just tell somebody, you're in management, I'm going to work you 65 hours a week, and you're just going to love it because you're paid salary. They actually had a new minimum threshold, and that's like $47,000 a year. Or you could pay people the overtime, and when you have food and beverage, where sometimes you're working a lot of banquets and other things in a week, you can have a lot of overtime. So what we did is we chose to take the 5 people that needed to be put up to that new salary level. We put them up to that salary level for January 2017 going forward, so that we didn't have to worry about the fluctuations of overtime. But that one item is by far the biggest component of the changes to payroll and benefits, was the implementation of the new Department of Labor regulations, which are mandated for everybody. There's no easy out to say, I'm a small company, I'm a medium-sized company, I'm in the service industry. This applies to everybody. And it's going to really shock, I think, a lot of people when you start going in and seeing fewer and fewer employees in places, because perhaps the owner says, I'm not willing to up people that much or pay the overtime that's required under the new law. So that's the biggest component for the changes in the payroll. Under cost of goods sold, since this is primarily a service area in food and beverage, you can't raise revenue without raising the products that you're selling. You sell a lot of food, that's good, but you got to buy the food and the booze to serve at the bar with the banquet or whatever. So we try to maintain the cost of goods sold
in a reasonable range. We usually budget for about 37% on the cost of goods sold for food and beverage operations. If we can maintain that a little bit lower, that's good, but sometimes you have to buy it in order to get some of these bigger events. But that's part of, when things go up, so does the cost of goods sold. For the golf shop, people have said, your cost of goods sold seems a little high. Well, we offer a discount to anyone who lives here that goes in and buys anything at the golf shop. So not only do you get the sale rate, you get the discount before the sale rate, and that ends up being a cost because you can't get the extra revenue. So the ratio of the golf shop relative to the revenue is quite a bit higher. Don't think that we're just trying to have smaller margins. It's just the reality of how it works out when people go in and buy things and then come out and say, well, I got a great discount. And there are some super shoppers around here, let me tell you. They wait until things are on a super reduced rack. They get 80% off, and then they still get their member discount because they live here. So people are shopping very smartly, but it does cost in the long run to the total operations. And then operating expenses are the rest of those are on your schedule there. And that covers what you think about when you look at the operations here. The gasoline for the mowers, the sand for the sand traps, things like that that have to be purchased and used up. It's amazing how much sand gets hit out of those traps. They constantly fill them back up. Me personally, I don't ever get into sand traps.
Oh, you're right.
But I mean, think about what are the expenses that are so subject to change. Water is by far the biggest one. If nature gives us the water, we're happy. If it doesn't, we're going to have a green course, subject to that type of weather issue. But other than that, a lot of this is very predictable. And again, in the budget process, you want to make sure that you have predictable, reasonable costs that you're trying to plan for. And in the operating budget that you have in front of you, these were all taken into account to get the supplies and the equipment, things like that, to make sure that everything happens the way it's supposed to. This is the balance aspect. This is my balance slide. We talked about the last two. This is the third budget meeting that I've done for the community. We tried to come up with balancing the wants and desires of the residents to the reality that we can't run this like a private club because we need outside players to come in and play on the golf course and take advantage of what we offer. So, the rates for the non-resident golf charges are going up. Not for you, but for people from the outside. So that's a balancing thing. And that gets factored into those 33,000 rounds where we try to bring in a little bit more money. The single annual pass fee is going up $345. The couple's annual pass fee is not going up. That's again a balance thing. When couples buy the thing, the fee for the year, it seems they play a lot on weekends, they play a lot of men's and women's clubs. So again, we're trying to acknowledge that that's a high utilization. We know that they're going to guarantee us some revenue coming in, but we're not going to take advantage of them as much as trying to bring the fee for the single ones up to a realistic level to compete to courses around us. And again, we have the statistics to know how many people use the club a lot and play golf a lot and use that annual fee. And some of the guys I've golfed with can tell you to a penny how many times they have to play in a particular year to make it advantageous for them. That's all in there, but again, that will go up. The trail fees are going up because, again, competing with the golf carts and the fees being charged for golf cart rentals. If you don't use a golf cart from the community and you have your own, it kind of displaces some of the money that's being missed out because this is not a walking course. You basically drive on this course. So that goes up a little bit. The small bucket goes up $1, I think, to the smaller rate. The daily fee is still going to stay the same. So again, you see people going over there 3-4 times a day on the daily rate where they're hitting hours of balls. That won't change. It'll just be for the person who wants to get warmed up before they go out. And then the revenue increases from golf. We had, I mentioned earlier, since the food and beverage went up over $100,000 just through where it was this time last year. We wanted to be careful that we didn't just say, well, we can do that again. You have to be careful that you don't budget for this huge increase in food and beverage. But we think that with the history we have, a lot of the budgeting for revenue in food and beverage can be achieved. So we're going to increase that a little bit, not a huge proportion, but we are going to plan on having more income from food and beverage, including the banquets. Now the challenge is, and I talked about balance, if all of you decided to not eat up here ever again in 2017 or beyond, or play this golf course, that's a big detriment to the plan. And I think, again, from the balance, you can't say that we've done 50 outside tournaments and gypped you an entire week of golf because we have this PGA thing all the time. We try to keep it under control, that we time them and space them so that we're not inconveniencing any particular group. The weather is a huge impact on this, besides your personal decision making. If we have bad weather during summertime, during our best months, it hurts. And it hurts very visibly because we gear up for May, June, July, and August to be our best months because the sun's up the most, we can go out early, we can play late, we have evening rates, we have groups going out Mondays and Thursdays. That's an important component of this. So again, this is all predicated on some balance even on the weather side. So we try to make sure that we balance as much as we can. We can't control the weather, but we hopefully can control the way we communicate what we're doing so that you understand what we're trying to accomplish and can see that there is a goal to be balanced in what we're doing from revenue generation.
The next 3 slides will recap a lot of what's been covered already by Steve and David, and some of it is also captured on that handout that most of you got when you came through the door. I'm going to move through them fairly quickly, and I'm going to use some prepared remarks because there's a lot of information there, and I want to make sure I don't skip over anything of any significance. About 2/3 down the page, the revenue subtotal, $6.5 million versus the latest forecast of $6,361,000. That's an overall increase of $159,000 compared to the latest forecast for this year. The increase almost is entirely in golf and food and beverage, as HOA assessments for operations is unchanged at $168 a month. As David said earlier, of that $3.4 million you see in the budget for next year, $13,000 increase from the latest forecast for this year. That other $496,000, as David mentioned, it's revenue from snow and lawn services, the administrative and accounting fees that are charged to the 2 sub-associations, Traditions and Villages, newsletter ad revenue, and then we get additional fees from closings upon the sale of residences here in the HEDJC. The Greens Fee, Golf Shop, and other course revenue increased $82,000 in the budget for next year compared to the latest forecast for this year. Food and beverage budgeted revenues up $64,000 from the latest forecast. And again, that's primarily from catering events, banquets, and other events generally associated with golf. As David mentioned, cost of goods sold. This represents for food, the consumable beverage, the direct costs for beverage and food consumed, and for the golf shop, the cost of the merchandise sold, apparel, equipment, that sort of thing. For golf, constant at 72% of sales, and for food and beverage, we kept that constant at 37% of sales. And on increased revenue, we will generate increased gross margin, most of that $124,000 you see there. So gross profit, all revenues minus the direct cost for food and beverage and golf merchandise sold, $5.8 million next year compared to the latest forecast this year of $5.7 million. In total, $124,000 increase at the gross profit line. Taking a little deeper dive into the operating expenses, overall increase $332,000 with payroll and payroll burden, and the burden represents the employer's share of payroll taxes, all of the health, welfare, and retirement benefits we provide to our OB employees. Is increased $208,000 for all of next year compared to the latest forecast. All other operating expenses in total will increase based on the budget, $124,000. Drivers for the payroll costs, which represent a little bit over than half of the total operating costs for HEDGC. Salary and wage increases to attract and retain talent in all positions. We are definitely experiencing a tightening labor market here in this area, especially for people who are experienced and skilled. David mentioned the impact of the new labor laws affecting the payment of overtime, resulting in changes in the salary pay scales. Increases in health insurance costs due to premium increases, and as David mentioned, more employees qualifying for coverage due to longer tenure here at the club and lower employee turnover. And then finally, that payroll budget reflects an intention by management to fully staff at levels consistent with the budget and the desired level of service by the residents and the public. I should note that the staffing for golf and food and beverage is highly seasonal. Our head count ranges from 85 during the winter months to over 130 during the summer months. And so that presents quite a few challenges in terms of attracting and hiring and retaining people, both the kind you want and the times you want to employ them. For operating expenses, the drivers other than payroll include higher budgets for water and electricity, higher budget for repair and maintenance in all areas, especially the irrigation systems for the golf course and the pocket parks, and increased repairs and maintenance for the clubhouse, especially with regard to the pool and the downstairs area. And then finally, we are experiencing some pretty significant increases in our general insurance coverages. This last slide summarizes, gives you a capsule income statement, comparison of the budget to the forecast for next year. The forecasted net income for next year of revenues, the forecast for this year, revenues over expenses, net income, if you will, $258,000 compares to a budgeted net income of $38,000 or a $220,000 improvement over budget. $41,000 of that favorable variance is due to improved gross profit on higher golf and food and beverage revenues, $72,000 in lower than budgeted payroll expense, and $107,000 in all of our other operating expense other than payroll and payroll-related expenses. The 2017 budget reflects essentially a break-even with net income of $51,000 on total revenues of $6.5 million. And that break-even is due to, first of all, holding the assessment, that portion of the monthly assessment at $168 for operating purposes. Note that this assessment is unchanged since 2013. In 2012, that assessment was $173 a month. So higher revenues are budgeted to result in gross profit of $5,835,000. Operating expenses budgeted at $5,784,000, resulting in an excess or net income of $51,000. Last year, recall, we budgeted $38,000 of net income, and so at the end of the day, we take essentially the same approach in generating sufficient revenue to cover expenses.
Thank you, Bob. And for your first time out of the chute and in front of a large crowd, huh? You know, successes create almost as many problems as challenges. And we have been very successful here, particularly since OB Sports arrived. In 2013, the average age of this community was 71 years old. Now we have 1,441 homes. We have approximately 2,500 residents. And now, 3 years later, the average age is 69. So it's come down 2 years, and over that big a number, you have to figure the number of new people moving in here that are younger is large. In 2009 or 10, we made a change of being an all 55 and older to where we are now 80%, our goal is to be 80% 55 and older, but the 20% can be 45 and older. In order to protect our age classification of the senior community, we need to maintain that 80%, but more people are moving in and they're wanting different activities. And we're being able to give those to them. But we've also generated these successes, and we need to pay attention to how we handle the money that we're bringing in. So we're paying attention to the legality and the taxation and all those kinds of things. But you have been more than patient to help us get to where we need to get to be good stewards of your money and not just willy-nilly go out and buy the latest, greatest, newest. And so we have been very slow in saying, how do we get there? Now it's also important to know that since 2013, we produced those positive numbers. Bob touched on something just a second ago. And that is in 2013, we contributed $173 a month to the operating fund. Since 2013, in other words, 14, 15, and 16, we contributed $168, and we are going to hold that number at $168 going into 2017. Now, all of our payroll, the lights, the water, the beautiful flowers that we have in the summer, the holiday decorations that we have, all of the improvements that we've enjoyed as our quality of life issues have been driven and derived by good, sound management that's grown the top line, mostly from outside events as opposed from inside and affecting us to have our facilities available or our golf course available and all those kinds of things. So I'd like for you to look to the back of the room. That handsome man with the black sweater is the guy that's been driving this ship ever since they got here in 2014, and it's been contribution. You don't need for that handsome remark, by the way. So what's that mean? That means in 13, 14, and 15, we produced a net income of $1,027,000. And we still have that money, and it's invested in a way that meets all the government criteria, and the things that David has done and Bob had done before him, and Bob is certainly capable to continue that going forward. But now it's time to let go of some of that money and put it back to work for the community. And that's exactly what we're going to do. First of all, as I said earlier, and Dave made the same remarks, and in 2014 we did a comprehensive reserve fund study. We're going to do another one in 2017. That's going to cost about $15,000 to do that. And even though they did a great job, how many swimmers do we have here in the room? Quite a few. How many of you have ever been in the indoor pool, noticed those doors off to the left when you go in there, and how many of you have ever gone in that room? 2 of you, 3 of you, 4 of you. That's the pool mechanical room that is corroded and in dire need of repair. And it's going to cost in excess of $100,000 and the inspector that was here didn't go in that room. So it's not in our $27 million that we have to come up with. We have to fund that. So we do have some unexpected expenses, but thank goodness, because of the net income, we have $1 million that we can invest in those kinds of things. But primarily, here's what we're going to do. In 2017, we're going to do extensive road replacement, underline the word replacement, not repair, but replace the roads to a large extent, as much as we can, on the east side. If any of you drive down Buchanan on a regular basis, you would think you were in Iraq and it had been a mortar range, because that road is in bad shape, and so is a lot of the other roads on the east side. We're not supposed to do any of that kind of road work until 2019, but we're going to be able to pull that money forward and not compromise our ability to fund the reserve fund expenses that we have coming at us and that have been identified. So we're going to use that money to help with being able to do things earlier. We're also going to be able to protect our negative cash flow that we don't know what's going to happen in January, February, and March. We budget 0 on the golf operations. So one of the things you may say is, well, wait a minute, you're supposed to only get $38,000 this year, and you're going to be north of $200,000. Part of that is because of the fact that we had some good playing days and we were able to generate revenue that we didn't plan on. We can't predict the weather, so we certainly budget on a conservative basis and plan for worst case scenario, not best case scenario. We're going to have that same approach in 2017. We're also going to have new items. We don't know what they are. We don't have a good process for that. In fact, I was talking to one of the directors, Ken Nelson, before the meeting started, and the highest priority that we have once we get this budget behind us is to identify a process that says, if Hank comes up with a great idea for a new project here, and Connie comes up with a great idea for a new project here within the community, how do we go about determining whether or not Hank's is better than Connie's or vice versa? Right now, we don't know. We don't have a good process for that. We need to be thinking long-term. We need to be thinking what has the greatest impact on the community as a whole, but we will be certainly working for that on the new items. We got a lot of sounder footing on the reserve side than we do on the capital improvement side, but isn't it great that come the holiday party, I keep referring to that, but how many times have I had to stand in here while Cynthia's pulled up the car on a cold night to pick me up after a long event, and not have a nice warm place to stand? Well, those days are going to be gone. We'll have a warm place, a cool place, this entry vestibule, not to mention the signature statement that's going to add to the front of our clubhouse. So our goal is that we want to maintain the reserves at an adequate but not excessive threshold. I've told you that we're conservative, but that at least we know that we can stand up for any audit and make sure that we've got the money on a sound basis. When David came on board 2.5 years ago, we made the transition from a fully funded to a cash flow method of accruing money for our reserve fund. In the simplest of terms, what that says is that we project out over these 20 years how much money we have to have and how much money we have to take in to hit each one of those benchmarks. As opposed to where we were, if we were at a 40% fully funded on a $28 million basis, we would have to have $11 million in the reserve fund. As it is, we're going to finish with $2+ million. I'm going to talk to you about that in just a minute. But this also does consider the inflation rate, and it has it at a 1.1 annual rate of return. So these guys really know what they're doing when it comes to investing in a fashion that meets all the government criteria. If we have money in a money market, anybody still has money in the money market, you're getting about 0.8, not 1.1. I guess it's 0.08. not 0.8, 0.08, not 1. Okay, so we're not doing near as good as these guys are doing. So here's that $28 million, and that we have to have for the reserve fund. Now that's subject to change. I'm going to show you a slide here in just a minute, depending upon how this new reserve study comes out that we're going to be doing in 2017. So we've had items that were not included in the previous reserve fund studies, brought that up $5 million higher than we had originally anticipated, and yet we've been able to finance that and get there and keep the reserve fund contribution at the $65 level up to now. And the board did create a subcommittee that reviewed this when we had the reserve study. Now, here's what it looks like. Look out here in 2021, 2026, 27, 31. These are right around the corner. Now, it's interesting that in these last 2 years, we've spent $1.1 million in 15 and $1.2 million in 16. We've been able to fund that. We have another $1 million in 2019 right around the corner. These are some of those expenses that, because we've got that $1 million of net income, we're going to be able to pull some of those expenses forward, which overall keeps us on the glide slide to hit our benchmarks without undue burden on us as residents. So these are big numbers coming at us.
No, you have a plan. And again, when we came up with different scenarios that would work, we tried everything from doing nothing and just saying, okay, we're just going to stay exactly at $65, and how quickly do you run out of money? Or we could do a little bit, or this or that. And each one kind of showed that we were just trending down to the point of spending all the money before we would take in enough. So after those what-if scenarios, we tried to come up with an approach that would be reasonable, because again, on a cash flow basis, you don't need all your money right away. And that 40% threshold that Steve talked about was kind of that goal to get to you have so much money in advance, then you have the problem of people saying, well, you over-collected and you're not spending it on reserve funds, so why'd you get all that money up front? So trying to make it work, we had the approach to have an $8 increase, a $6 increase, and a $4 increase, in that order. We did the $8, Steve talked about the $6 where we comped you the $6, but very few people remember that we were comped $6 for last year, and this year was scheduled to be a $4 increase. Then it would stay flat for a couple of years, because then you would have those higher amounts coming due, so you want to get more money before they came in. So again, this was all well thought out. We had spreadsheets, we talked about it, the committees, facilities and grounds, finance committee, the board. We really did get into it, because you didn't want to have the expectation that people thought you collect money too fast, or you have an unrealistic plan. The plans also go through analysis. So just because it's in the reserve study, Steve did mention this, but this is not a federal grant program. You don't spend $1.2 million because that's what the reserves fund said you should. You look at the projects and you say, do we really need them? And if you do, you get them. And if you don't, you defer them or just completely ignore them, because there are some things that you can ignore. Also, we did some repairs to trucks instead of buying new trucks. A $5,000 transmission repair is better than a $35,000 truck. Now, eventually, that repaired truck is going to need to be replaced. You can't just put in a new transmission, it's going to run forever. But it's that type of analysis that goes on so that you understand how we plan on spending the money. So this is the way it was, and it came up to that anticipated smaller downward trending contributions, only collecting the money as we needed it to really meet the plan, with the perfect knowledge that at 5 years we'd be doing another study to make sure that everything was still on track.
So here's just a slide, probably hard to read from where you're sitting, that talks about what David just got through talking about. Here is the $6, here's the $8, the $6, and $4, that's 2017. And it goes on out, again, subject to change, particularly after we do the new study. The $6 increase was at $103,000. We touched on that already. The payback, we've been able to pay back 2015 unexpected expenses. I touched on that. There are certain things in that reserve study that were missed, but that have come forward. Or the doggone thing wasn't supposed to break until 2019. Wouldn't you know, broke in 2016. We had to fix it anyway. Perfect example of that would be like the lake pump that broke in midsummer out here this year. But we've been able to keep that $65 contribution that you've paid constant through 2016. And the future increases are necessary if we're going to maintain this in a state of function as expected. One of the things that gets HOAs the biggest target on their back by, the reason people hate HOA, people say, why the hell are you doing HOA stuff? And they think we're village idiots. But we're not. We care about you, we care about this community. And as a consequence, one of the things that we have to avoid is being too cheap on this reserve fund. I'm telling you, when realtors come out here and get ready to sell the homes out here, their eyes roll in the back of their head. They can't believe how well funded we are and how sound our thought and our financial plans are for taking care of this community, and that's exactly what we're going to continue to do. Now, we have better than expected investment returns and changes to planned expenditures. David just touched on that. If we have something on there that's scheduled to be replaced, but it's running and working just fine, we're not going to buy it just because it says we need to buy it according to this plan. We were able to delay expenses, and in some cases we have to move expenses forward. We are accelerating that road replacement and repair program. We have big numbers coming at us in the areas I showed you. In 2019, we've got $1.3 million primarily in the road area, and we're going to be able to address that earlier. And increasing the contribution to 2017 allows us to maintain the expenditures without jeopardizing our ability to keep the reserve fund funded in a fashion as we've been describing. The 2016 target, we're on target. Unexpected expenses were paid, and one expense that came in 2016 wasn't scheduled until 2019. The anticipated balance in this 2016 reserve fund is $2.3 million. We started the year at $2.1 million. We spent $1.3 million, a lot of numbers here, but the bottom line is that we've been able to grow our balance, pay out large numbers to maintain the things that we needed to maintain in 2019, and still go into 2017 with $2,300,000 in the reserve fund to repair or replace things that need replacing or need fixing. That is very solid financial. Now, let me shift to the capital improvement. Everything basically we've talked up to now is very succinctly, the operating fund isn't going up a penny. The reserve fund, we talked a lot about what we've done, what we need to do, how we're going to continue to assess that so that we can stay on target to make sure that we keep what we have, the chairs that we're sitting on, for example, new and replace them before somebody sits here and falls down because they break, is that now we need to talk about how do we come up with these new things and what does that really mean to us in dollars and cents. David touched on this earlier in the fact that currently we bring in roughly $260,000 a year. We also bring in 3 months closing every time somebody buys a new house, and through August we've had 74 new home sales and brought in an additional $55,000 on top of that. So we believe that the capital improvement fund is also very sound. But we don't have a plan for those next big projects out there, particularly when we look at it and we see that we're going to finish the year in this account at $720,000 approximately. So we got $2.3 million in the reserve account. We got $720,000 in the capital improvement account. And this is after we paid for these projects. I don't know how many of you have eaten in the Eagle's Nest now in the last 2 weeks since we have the noise abatement done, but you can actually sit across the table and have a conversation with someone without hearing the conversation that's 3 tables over if you're there in the morning. We're going to have our equipment. We have supported the purchase of a lot of landscape, snow removal, the equipment that we have here over the last couple of years. And yet it's been sitting outside in large part in the weather, the rain, the snow, and most particularly the sun. The upholstery, the rubber hoses, all those things that are exposed to the UV in Colorado is very damaging, and now we're going to be able to protect that with this pole barn that we have over there. And we've also touched on the entry vestibule and how nice that's going to be for an addition. Now we will be considering the request for new projects as we move forward. I talked to you about our highest priority is going to be how do we prioritize and identify the projects so that people have either brought to us through the community, through the committees, through the delegates, or through conversations with the board members. So here's the summary. The 2016 operating budget is showing better than planned net income, and the 2017 budget reflects projected income of $51,324. That's our target. If we know everything about what we're going to be facing, our target is $51,000 net income next year. If we do better, we're going to certainly have plans to how to use that money, but right now that's our target. The reserve fund requires the $10. If you go back without getting too hung up on the math, we said we needed a $6 increase last year and a $4 increase this year. That's the $10 that we're talking about. And we will cover that by doing 2 things. We're going to ask you for 5 of that $10. And we're going to move 5 of the $10 from the capital improvement fund to the reserve fund. The reason for that is twofold. We need the money in the reserve fund to stay on that $28 million glide slope or higher based upon this new study that we're going to be doing in 2017. But we have $720,000 in the capital improvement fund, and we don't have a planned purpose for that. So rather than continue to feed it at $15, we're going to lower that to $10 and move that $5 over to the reserve fund. So what we're saying in essence is that on November 10th, a month from today, through your delegates, you're going to tell us whether or not you're going to ratify a budget that takes your monthly dues from $248 a month to $253 a month. And that says that we will maintain, Gene will continue to do what he has to do with $168. We will have that $75 that we showed you where it came from the reserve study, and that we will be taking $10 a month, not $15 a month, for capital improvement for the budget. Now, that's the end of our presentation.